And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode 45, Friday, March 7th, 2025. I am your host, Jason Olborn, but I can't do it alone. Here she is, the one and only Nicola Charles. Nicola, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jason. Happy Friday, listeners. Thanks for checking in with the Daily Australian. I don't want to be extinct, Jason. I'm not done. Even though I'm quite old, I'm not done on this planet yet. So we'll keep struggling. What I'm really interested in at this point is chugging through what seems to be a bit scary, maybe 100 years of lies. I just shared on my X account a very interesting and quite funny clip of a cowboy in America having a go at the moon landing and talking how ridiculous it was. And he pinged something in my brain that how did they get off the moon to get back to Earth without any infrastructure? There's no Cape Canaveral on the moon, right? So very interesting, Jason. I guess we're dispelling a lot of myths on this show.
Well, I suppose there's a little bit less gravity on the moon, so they probably only needed a trampoline to jump on it and then off they go. So it is always astonishing that you can have a spacecraft made out of aluminium foil, and that's all you needed. But I was always fascinated by that car that they got up there with those huge wheels that could drive around.
That's what my husband said. The buggy was bigger than the thing that took it there.
Yeah, so obviously they're very good at Meccano set, and you and you just blow up the tires. But look, it is fascinating. I want to go there, go back there. I want to be able to take a hammer and bang the surface to see if it really does ring like a bell. So many questions. Some say it's hollow, some say it's honeycomb. The main thing is that it turns out that science is very good at trusting itself to the point where it no longer needs to verify anything.
Well, it's very pretty. I do like looking at the moon through my telescope. It is a very pretty thing. Now, on today's show, we're kind of chock full of guests, political guests. Very interesting, Jason.
Yeah, look, there has been some real buzz going on in the background. So yesterday, after episode 44, I had the opportunity to interview Gerard, Rennick, the senator from Queensland, and Michael O'Neill, the leader of the Heart Party, formerly IMOP, on the show. And it was, I'll tell you what, it was pretty good to get both gentlemen at the same time. And of course, part of the Australia First Alliance, to which they were explaining, is a triple joint ticket. And that means that the Libertarians forged the third part of this triangle. And Craig Kelly is the New South Wales lead Senate candidate as part of that joint ticket. And we will have Craig on the show very, very soon to explain his party's involvement and what we see going forward. Now, the video that was, we put it out straight away yesterday, which is brilliant. It's been very well received, tens of thousands of views, thousands of likes, hundreds upon hundreds of shares. And I even noticed that my follower numbers increased on X, which is pretty good, seeing as I am the world's most invisible man, most shadow banned person, I think, in Australian history, for reasons I still don't understand why. But no, this is a very positive sign. But the best part was that the comments on there and it being shared and people commenting in the sharing that they're doing is, I would say, 99.8% positive and excited. This is a big deal. Of course, you're always going to get your detractors and your trolls, but I'll tell you what, there's not many of them. And this means that I think, as I'd like to explain, going back to the seat of Paterson, where I ran in 2022, and Craig will probably remember this, well, I hope he does, but it was in Paterson that we formed what we called the Friends of Freedom, where myself as a UAP candidate, Sonia Bailey from the Liberal Democrats, as they were known then, also Angela Kiedis from IMOP, the three of us got together together and created this Friends of Freedom, and it was a way to join forces and also to get people to come on side and to understand that yes, you're allowed to have your different perspectives. Remembering back in 22, it was all about COVID, so IMOP and informed medical options, informed consent was a big deal. Liberal Democrats had their approach and were probably the most senior of the three parties, and then the UAP had a different approach again. Clive was throwing money around, of course, like he does, and he came up with some very interesting and innovative policies. Of course, he had the hydroxychloroquine $27 or $30 million investment, whatever it was, behind him, and he had that to talk about as well. And so it was a combination of, again, combining policies, but explaining to people, and based on what Topher Field's Marble video, how you would best preference. And so this formed part of this early stages. So I'm very proud of the work we did then. I remember George Christensen at the time got behind it as well and gave us some support, which was wonderful. And it went on into about 7 or 8 different electorates, I think, in New South Wales, and I think some were trying in some other states as well. So this was the very early stages. But what I'll say is now that we've gone to the joint ticket situation, it's much more exciting again, because now it's being formalised in a way with a real plan to be able to move it. And it is an evolution. This is only the beginning. And what I will say is 2 things. One, from little things, big things grow. And the second part is there is nothing quite like an idea whose time has come.
Jason, I think you've had too much coffee today. You're talking very quickly.
Well, the difference is, for those that are listening in and following along, we pre-record this show because we have to.
You've had a lot of coffee too.
And well, it's not so much, I've only had one coffee, but here's the point. We're a little bit later than we were the previous parts of the week. So I think my heart has actually started.
It feels weird.
I feel like I've been up for hours already.
Well, what I want to say about this situation quickly before we go to the headlines about this Australia alliance and why I think it's exciting. I feel it's exciting because of what it's going to do to the Australian psyche, because the way I see it is I feel more comfortable now and more reassured that the Australian population, in large part, have sort of woken up, to use a very, popular term. They are awake, and they're also, annoyed and frustrated with what's going on and the rampant spending of Labor and all of these plans that don't seem to be in the interest of the people. But what this Australia alliance seems to allude to is sort of a waking up within the body politic. And I think that's really good. And I think people will be excited. And I think if these guys in the alliance do the right thing, I think they will garner enormous public support. So it's exciting. So, Jason, let's get to those headlines, because then I would love to get to our guest today.
All right. Given that it's Friday, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the bulletin. There'll be a little bit more Friday type of news for you, if you will, but still as serious as it gets here. So residents in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland are bracing for Cyclone Alfred, and some are evacuating in Lismore and other towns as reports of massive 12-metre waves hitting the beach on the Gold Coast. Odd radar video shown on social media appears to show laser beams shooting across the screen toward the eye of the storm, prompting viewers to ask if this weather system is being enhanced. The question, of course, is why. The reaction to our interview yesterday with 2 of the 3 members of the Australia First Alliance joint ticket has been impressive, with Senator Gerard Rennick and Michael O'Neill. We'll have Craig Kelly from the Libertarians join us a little bit later. Mainstream media in Australia, and in particular the Murdoch press, continues to try anything to undermine President Donald Trump, today trying to attack him for a hot mic moment where he simply thanked Supreme Court Justice John Roberts. The newspaper has also decided to attack First Lady Melania Trump in recent days with consecutive hit pieces. Mrs. Trump might reportedly effing hate her husband, it says, but she has just fully endorsed him and proven herself to be on board with her husband's politics as a true believer. Can you believe this nonsense? What it comes down to is this: Mrs. Trump, it says, might allegedly hate the man himself, but she is a true believer in Trumpism. This is the extent of where they're going. They've snookered themselves. Last week, it said, this is where it gets really interesting, the way that the language is used by this particular journalist writing for news.com.au. Last week, respected long-time Trump world watcher author Michael Wolff revealed his theory that
we're not allowed those. Excuse me.
That's right. That it's the first AI written bestseller. So that
Oh,
was Michael Wolff. That's what he's come out with. And this author said, long-time respected world watcher. Now, Michael Wolff has been entirely discredited by others in the media and within politics for his use of using off-record sources, made-up citations and interviews, and includes Alan Dershowitz, Meghan McCain, and Tony Blair, who've all come out harshly against him, and all of whom are notable Trump detractors. NBC News has shared an article asking if socially distanced chickens are laying more affordable eggs. Of course. Can you believe this? This refers to free-range egg prices remaining steady as battery hen prices are rising. This is largely due to the practice of culling entire hen populations and ignoring other methods of selectively reducing the populations as previously discussed on this show. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rowlands has recommended that Americans raise their own chickens to help deal with the soaring price of eggs. The newly confirmed official in the cabinet of President Donald Trump made the recommendation on Fox and Friends weekend, Saturday, to anchor Rachel Campos Duffy. I think the silver lining in all this is how do we, in our backyards, we've got chickens too in our backyard, how do we solve for something like this? Well, this is a big deal because finally somebody in a position of power is saying what you've all been thinking all along about self-sufficiency. Rep. Al Green has been censured in Congress after his outburst in the joint session earlier this week to hear President Trump's address to the nation. French President Emmanuel Macron says the EU has to be ready to take on Russia alone after US has frozen Ukraine aid. In the wake of the turbulence caused by Donald Trump, one world leader, it says, has taken upon himself to warn the EU of the looming worst-case scenario. In a nationally televised address this week, Macron warned that Russia's aggression knows no borders and won't stop at Ukraine, urging France and Europe to prepare for a long period of providing extra funding to repel the invading force. I want to believe that the US will stay on our side, Macron said, but we have to be ready if that isn't the case. Meanwhile, Germany has announced it will stop sending weapons to Ukraine because it has effectively run out. And Mexican drug cartels are reportedly worried about their futures with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. I told you it was a strange bulletin. According to a seemingly sympathetic report from the New York Times, can you believe this? The cartels are expressing fears that their business model is at risk because of the Trump administration's crackdown on drug cartels. The report states, one cartel leader says he's trying to figure out how to protect his family in case the American military strikes inside Mexico. Another said he's already gone into hiding, rarely leaving his home. Two young men who produce fentanyl for the cartel say they have shut down all their drug labs. Can you believe that, Nicola?
What do you mean they've gone into hiding? Don't they live their entire lives in hiding? It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the fact that the New York Times is sympathetic to that just tells you what's going on with the establishment media. But I just want to quickly reference that Emmanuel Macron speech, which was the rhetoric was literally apocalyptic. The whole world sort of went, it was a collective gasp, like, you know, the warmongering was at fever pitch. And yeah, you wouldn't want to be in France right now. But I do think it's all lip service. I do think they are all doing the bidding of those we cannot see. So let's see what happens. I mean, none of these countries can go it alone. The members of the British Parliament were speaking on GB News saying, look, we can't. Britain's army and navy and air force is depleted. We couldn't possibly do any of this without America. So if America isn't going, none of them are going. So that's how that's going to work out. But yeah, interesting headlines. And just to clarify, that young lady's name on Fox is Rachel Campos Duffy. And she's very good and very interesting. Okay, fantastic, Jason. Very strange headlines today. But, you know, it's Casual Friday, so that's what you get.
Well, that's it. Now, there's one more thing I want to read before we move into our main segment for the day, and I'll explain what we're going to do. So, in a moment, I'm going to play for you a segment from the interview recorded yesterday that's up in full on my X page and it's been shared hundreds, if not thousands, of times now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring Craig Kelly in and perhaps sort of ask him questions, maybe in line with that, and then some other stuff. And hopefully we'll be able to keep Craig on for a little bit more than we normally would because there's a lot to cover. But the reason that I've set all that up is I want to read. This is something written by Clandestine on Substack and X, and I think he's got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers, and it's about Ukraine. And he writes, it's a couple of paragraphs. I'm surprised how many people were completely unaware that the CIA were openly sharing intelligence with Ukraine. Most of the country have no idea that Ukraine is a proxy of the United States. They use our money, weapons, equipment, training, intelligence. The only thing that makes the Ukrainian army Ukrainian is that they are using Ukrainian bodies instead of American ones. That's it. Everything else in the Ukrainian military is a US NATO product. Ukraine's military is an army that the US NATO built for fighting Russia indirectly. They are a pawn on a chessboard, and the US NATO view them as dispensable. That's why Putin escalated in 2014 when the US conducted regime change in Ukraine. He knew what the US were up to. He knew the US were planning to build an army on his border, an army designed to fight Russia. He was right. Flashback to 2016 when corrupt US politicians Graham Klobuchar and McCain were in Ukraine telling the Ukrainian soldiers that the US will provide them with everything they need to go on the offensive and fight Russia. Most people around the world have no idea that the US started this war. Now, that's about as hot as you can get, but it is a massive dose of reality. Now, I know Craig Kelly doesn't mince his words, and we're going to have him on in just a moment. In the meantime, let's recap from yesterday's interview. Here is a small segment from that with Senators Gerard Rennick and leader of the Hart Party and Senate candidate number 2 in New South Wales, Michael O'Neill. Michael, can you tell us how it was that you decided to come along to this meeting on Sunday?
Well, we've been listening to the people. If we get one message that consistently comes through to us as a party is people want to see minor parties that have similar views, often very, very close in all their objectives, join together so that they diffuse a lot of the confusion. And I've been very keen to do this. And we were just looking for the correct vehicle to do it. And John Ruddock's plan, I believe, was a wonderful plan. Our executive unanimously voted to get on board. So we are very happy to be here. And I believe it's a response to the people's calls to do it. And if we're going to say that we represent the will of the people, then we need to represent the will of the people.
Now, Gerard, your background, obviously, you were a LMP senator for Queensland, and that circumstances led to you having to leave the party, but create Gerard Rennick's People First Party. Can you explain why you went down that pathway, but still led towards this alliance? I think there's a little bit of nuance that people should understand.
The three things that are really at the heart of our politics are freedom of speech, freedom of bodily autonomy, and parental rights. We feel that these are severely under attack, and these really affect the tenets of freedom that this country was founded on, and also basically for the person just living their life, wanting to look after their body or take control of their families, and they have lost the right to do this if it somehow disagrees with a narrative that the government has embraced. We feel this is a travesty of justice, and I really want to fight for parents, particularly parents' rights to do, to take back control of their family, their children, their life, and like freedom of speech. If you have your speech prescribed, then what are you? You've lost your everything that makes you a human being, just to be able to come into some sort of robotic narrative that you don't agree with. That's just pure straight out of Stalin's handbook. And we do not want to see our country going that way.
Yeah, well said, Michael. Gerard, your three key policies going into the election?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, it is nuanced. You have to be in a party to get your name above the line on the Senate ticket. There wasn't any other options, basically, in what I'd call a major minor party up here. And I really wanted the time to just push. I mean, I had gotten nowhere in the last 5 years when I was within the coalition about policy formulation. I just felt like every time I was going to Canberra, I was on the back foot about government introducing more controls over people's personal lives rather than trying to provide solutions. So I just wanted to go out on my own, actually, and have some fresh air and push policy instead of talking, either bickering with the other side or bickering, just the general melee of bickering in politics. I didn't really want to focus on personalities or parties either. I just wanted to focus on policies, so that's why I went out on my own. But having said that, I recognise that there is a need for the minor parties, and I recognise all these brands, and I think they've done very well, and they deserve our respect for the brands that they have. And what I like about the alliance is it enables people to keep the brand and to appeal to people with particular interests. But we can work as an alliance because the coalition's an alliance. People forget that it's quite a strange alliance in many respects because it's the inner city wealthy elites and the actual regional communities, which sometimes if you step back and take a look at it, it's actually quite a bit of a weird juxtaposition. Lower income taxes, voluntary superannuation, and greater flexible childcare support to the parents rather than childcare centre. And they're basically, and can I just say, Michael's 3 policies are very good as well. I mean, we encompass all of those policies. We want to push some economic policies. I think in the minor parties, we need to focus on economic solutions as well. I'm a big believer that debt it probably controls you more, or money controls you more than just about any other, even more than the government in some respects. And a good example of that was in a recent COVID, issue, whereby the government basically told people if you didn't get a jab, you were going to lose your job. Now, if you had your house paid off and had some money in the bank, you probably could have sat it out. But because many people had a mortgage, had bills to pay, had children's school fees to pay, or whatever, they needed to get that jab, and many of them, unfortunately, have been injured as a result of that, and now are incapable of working. Period. So we want to empower people economically as well, because we believe that will also give them much greater choice. Notwithstanding, there's a whole raft of other policies. It's a bit, there's a lot of things we need to do, and I fully embrace.
Well, let's now introduce to you the New South Wales Senate candidate, number 1 on the joint ticket. His name is Craig Kelly. He represents the Libertarian Party. We're going to get Craig to unmute himself because I know he's waiting in the wings. Craig Kelly, welcome for the first time to the Daily Australian Radio Show.
No, great to be with you guys, and I hope I'm unmuted and coming through loud and clear.
Yes,
Certainly
you are, Craig. You sound great.
That's all good.
Good to have you on the show, Craig, and I am absolutely thrilled that you have, as you always do, take this political system and lead by example. Now, many times I've referred to you in the past in our interviews as the Australian version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. There were times that you stood up in that green low House of Representatives on your own and made speeches that represented the people, because that's what you do, instead of the other interests that they have. And you did it, and you fought to the point where your own party literally gave you away and sent you out there to do even more hard work. Now, interestingly, you then joined the UAP and became the leader of that party. Clive Palmer declared you'd be the next Prime Minister of Australia. You then moved to One Nation. You were there briefly, but it was assumed that you would be the New South Wales lead Senate candidate. But instead, you ended up at the Libertarians. And this is what some might call you a journeyman, but this is a man, I believe, that is principled. And I'm going to get you to explain all of that in a moment. Firstly, Craig, therefore, can you just explain a little bit about your journey that got you to the Libertarians?
Yeah, look, it has been a bit of a journey along the way. Look, one thing I would say, I haven't changed my values one bit. My beliefs and the things that I stand in have been completely consistent all the way through. The Liberal Party that I joined in 2009 and ran as a member for in 2010 and won actually 4 separate elections as a Liberal Party member. It's no longer the Liberal Party that I joined. They have completely changed on a lot of their policies. They no longer believe in freedom of speech. They no longer believe in small government. And it's a completely different party that I joined. So people say, oh, you left the Liberal Party. I say, no, it was the Liberal Party that left me. And so now I find myself at the Libertarians, which, funnily enough, are made up of a lot of ex-Liberal Party members that feel exactly the same way.
Isn't that interesting that the Libertarians is the natural progression for those that feel like that the Liberal Party left them? So, what impresses me about the Libertarians, probably more than any other freedom or people movement party or third party, is the fact that they are incredibly well organised. Do you put it down to the fact that what you have are people that have played in the mainstream parties and understand the branch structure and therefore understand the merits and purpose of being a very serious political party?
I think that's very true. You could take the president in New South Wales, Ross Cameron. Ross was a former minister in the Howard government, the former Liberal member for Parramatta. So Ross is a highly experienced political person. You've got John Ruddick, who's the upper house member here elected at the last state election, representing the Libertarian Party in the upper house. He's someone who's a former Liberal Party member. He actually wrote a book called Reforming the Liberal Party or Remaking the Liberal Party, something along those lines. So we do have a lot of experienced people, but I think the main strength of the Libertarian Party is it is a grassroots party. There's no one up above dictating the rules and telling everyone what to do and making all the candidate selections. All the policies are done from the grassroots. All the selections of the candidates are done from the grassroots, where every member has a say. And that's something that a lot of the other minor political parties on the right of the coalition can't say that. I think it's that freedom that we give to our members to run the party. That's our real difference and our real strength.
Craig, can I ask you, look, I think it's great that you are experienced enough to understand the body politic and the political structure, and that's absolutely what we need on the independent side. But for the average Australian who doesn't understand it, the only thing they understand is that their life is getting progressively worse. Do you plan in this Australia First Alliance to keep fighting for the everyday person?
Okay, absolutely. That's where our policies are. The biggest hit to the average, like the wealth of the average day Australian, is this ridiculous policy of net zero that is causing us enormous harm. We've had everyone's up, Labor out celebrating. We had 1/4, the last ABS numbers show 1/4 of growth of GDP per capita of 0.1%. But before that, we've had 7/4 of negative GDP growth per capita. Our productivity is declining. Everything in this country for the individual citizen is going backwards. But for the large corporates who benefit from a growing economy, they're benefiting from large rates of migration. The average citizen isn't. And we see all these large corporations making a lot of money out of these renewables and increasing their profits. Again, that's to the disadvantage of the average citizen. So again, if you look at the policies that I think the Libertarian Party have, and also guys like Gerard Rennick with the great work that he's done, and a lot of the other minor parties, we're no longer, we're not certainly not the big end of town. The policies that we are pushing forward are to the benefit of the average Australian.
Because these Australians are done with these politicians who keep giving themselves pay rises and buying $4.5 million beach homes while Australians are suffering. I mean, there's people in this country that can't afford to eat. There's mums and kids living out of cars. Do you think it is doable? Is it doable to restore a quality of life for, well, let's say the original Australians? I'm all for welcoming new Australians, and I always have been. I was a new Australian myself 30 years ago. But do you think we can get the standard of living back up to a pleasant, livable level for everyday Australians?
Look, we should. We are a very wealthy country when it comes to natural resources, natural mineral resources. We're one of the wealthiest.
Keep giving it away, Craig. Are you going to help? Yeah, we can't give it away.
We've got to make sure not only do we get a fair price for it, but also we're able to use it ourselves.
Yeah.
The idea that we've got this magnificent black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard that's been a source of our wealth and national competitive advantage for decades, that we can no longer use it, but we can ship it off to communist China. This is madness. This is complete madness. We can restore ourselves to be one of the highest income nations in the world if we just get back to looking at what our natural competitive advantages are and putting them to use, rather than at the moment trying to lock them up and trying to do things where we don't have a competitive advantage. Like the idea that we can import solar panels from China and import wind turbines from China and somehow be a rich and prosperous economy is just pure nonsense.
Mm. Yeah.
Craig, net zero clearly is a policy that the Libertarians reject wholeheartedly. Can you tell us two other ones to simplify? Because we gave the opportunity for the other two parties to put their three policies forward.
Certainly. Look, I think one of the another important policy that we are very different from the Liberal and Labor Party is that on freedom of speech. Now, we believe that Australian citizens should have the same rights as citizens of the USA when it comes to free speech. Now, why should the Americans have their free speech protected in their constitution, but Australians don't have that same protection? So one of our policies that we are taking to this election is that we would like to see a referendum held at the next election. So we're not paying $500 million as Albanese did for the pointless voice referendum, run at the next election to enshrine freedom of speech in the Australian Constitution in the same manner that it is, or a very similar manner that it is in the US Constitution.
Well, that's fantastic, because there you go. You have now set me up for what I'm going to call, well, I think this is going to be the biggest question of the day. And it goes towards the Constitution, and perhaps it might even point down a darker rabbit hole for those that are really going to pull the strings together. Craig, why does the Conservative and People movement in Australia blindly support the monarchy when King Charles attends WEF meetings?
Look,
One sec. Hold that thought for a sec. Why do we have a Union Jack on our flag when the King does not even support the Union Jack of the British Empire to which he rules? Why can't the Conservative movement embrace nationalism and rebuild our country, work with our Constitution 1900 and enhance it to include and build a Bill of Rights and create our own head of state?
Thank you,
I'll tell you
Jason.
what, I've even got someone who I want to nominate for the first president of Australia. Craig, over to you.
Okay. Firstly, the fact that Charles can be head of the monarchy and we still have a functioning monarchy shows how actually good it is. The man is a complete dill. It's an embarrassment to have him referred to as our king. I've always been a staunch constitutional monarchist because I believe that is the strongest system of government we have. And until someone comes up with another system, let's stick with what we've got. As I said, Charles completely lost me on his support for the WEF, his climate evangelism that he goes on with, completely utter, off with the pixies. And as I said, I just think the man is an embarrassment. But unless you can come up with something better or something different, I'm happy to stick with our constitutional monarchy.
Now, here's the point, because conservative by definition means to not change, because you leave things as they are. I want to be able to explore now and go a little bit radical for those of us who are listening in and saying, well, we can't maintain the status quo. And those that are listening into the show realise that we're either going to go down the pathway of extinction or the greatest leap forward in history. There is no status quo. And that's what's bugging me about Australia, is that we're always last to the table in all of this. And I know, Craig, that you are one of the great political thinkers in this country, and that's why I'm throwing it at you more than I would throw it at anyone else. I think that we have to explore, like you said, until someone comes up with it. Well, I think the Australian people have got the wherewithal and the smarts to be able to start the conversation. Keating tried it with Malcolm Turnbull back in 1999, but it was oversimplified to the point that it literally collapsed, and all John Howard had to do was to maintain the status quo. So let's just throw it out there. I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but just say, for argument's sake, if Anthony Albanese can't get a second call with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump through contacts said, and it was reported, that he's not interested in talking to left-wing globalists at the same time as he's trying to end World War III. So park that there for a moment. J.D. Vance has said we don't align with people that don't align to our values. Europe is in the hole. Macron is playing a game that he can't win. If they couldn't win with the US for Ukraine to defeat Russia, they're not going to do it without the US. So let's just play fantasy politics, which is one of my favourite subjects. Say, for example, Australia gets stuck or found out, and through Doge and my interview with Charles Ortel the other day when we talked about corruption in charity fraud and how this may permeate through Australia, and Peter Dutton's on the ropes at the moment talking about insider trading. Who knows what's going on with these guys? Maybe they do get in trouble or get caught out, and we go down the pathway of a Doge, and people like Gerard and yourself could do some fantastic auditing, etc. What if, in Fantasyland, Australia temporarily was able to leave the Commonwealth for its own safety, became temporarily the 51st state of the United States, temporarily in a process of a holding pattern to rebuild its own constitution, elect its own head of state, establish a Bill of Rights, and be able to restore all of the things that we want, the freedom of speech. I'm not saying the right to bear arms. That might be a little bit too much for Australians.
I want that.
Well, there you go. And so it was. And here it is. We come back in somewhere down the track in 10 years' time, and it would take at least 10 years to get it right. But could you imagine if it turned out that the first president of Australia was elected, and it would largely be ceremonial to the point because we wouldn't be a presidential executive system of government? I just think, and I go, who would it be? And I thought, wouldn't it be great if our own Mandela was the first ceremonial president of Australia and his name was Julian Assange? How would that go?
Jason, first of all, we can't do that. We can't do that. Look, I want to say to you, Craig, look, you don't need a referendum to enshrine freedom of speech. What you need to do is bring down the Unlawful Australia Act of 1986. Because when that was voted in by politicians and not the people, and this was one of my beefs with Malcolm Roberts, is he said to me twice during interviews that, oh, the Australia Act, we're so lucky to have it because it was the only constitution voted for by the people. No, it wasn't. It wasn't voted for by the people, which means, as per the original constitution, 1900 UK, nothing to do with the monarchy, about the common man, still stands, because anything that comes after it that's not voted on by the people is invalid. So you don't need a referendum on freedom of speech. You just need to bring down the Unlawful Australia Act, because no one would have voted, Craig, to swap rights for privileges. So that's what we need to do. We need to at least think about it. I realize it's a really difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation because the concern is that everything that has gone since the Australia Act up to today is probably responsible for everything we're going through, right? Because governments did remove our privileges that they bestowed upon us when they locked us down for COVID. So I think there's some really key things you need to look at, because if people voted on a referendum to enshrine freedom of speech in the Australia Act of 1986, it would validate it. And we mustn't do that, because rights cannot be stolen. They can only be given away. So, Craig, we have to be really careful.
Yeah, look, I agree with all those points. But one thing I would say, apparently the High Court, there's a ruling, and they've interpreted the Constitution that there's an implied right to free political communication under the Constitution. Now, I say that's not enough. I say it should be specifically in there that governments can't come around and abridge our freedom of speech, exactly like they have in the USA. And look, I think we've also got some other problems we need to look at. Like, I think the separation of powers, I think, has got great question marks over it, because we see all the judges that are appointed become political appointees. And we saw during the COVID period how many of the judiciary were making decisions that were completely contrary to the evidence and completely contrary to the science, and in many cases completely contrary, to the rule of the land. So, I've got concerns with the separation of powers.
Well, they have to be held to account later on for decisions they've made.
Unfortunately, the judiciary is almost completely unaccountable. And then you've got the question, should we look at restructuring ourselves as we're, rather than having a minister from the government appointed. Now, let me give you an example of, I don't mean to pick on her, but like Claire O'Neill is the housing minister. What Claire O'Neill knows about housing, you could write on the back of a postage stamp. Now, would we be better to get someone from outside the political system, as they do in the US, someone with some real experience in the housing sector from the private sector, and have them Secretary for Housing? to help with the housing situation.
Well, I just worry that we already have too many private corporations and public-private partnerships, and that, in large part, it's been responsible for everything we've been through in Australia, because we were always told that these public-private partnerships were going to benefit us and they were going to make our departments better. But what they've done essentially is subvert democracy. So there has to be guidelines on that as well. Sure, we can work with private organisations and private individuals, but for the betterment of the Australian people, not so this country can be raped and pillaged constantly the way it has been for decades.
Well, that's why I'm saying we need to have a real look at how our constitution arrangements are, how we've got the Westminster system. Yes, it's proven, it stood the test of time, but can it be improved? And if we look at the situation in the UK at the moment, the disasters that the UK as a nation are facing, you've really got to question, is this the best system to take us forward into the next century?
Well, if you're fighting for a new system, Craig, I will support you guys, but it must be based on rights and not privileges. We're not pets.
Look, 100% correct. It's got to be that phrase, we the people, the government's got to come from the people up, not from the governments and the corporations down. And unfortunately, that's what we've got at the moment, where we've got the government getting bigger and bigger and bigger and imposing and taking away more and more of the average Australian's freedom and their rights.
Yeah,
well,
it's
Craig,
very unfair.
Craig, going forward post-election, and you said that you're looking towards the presumably the 2028 election for a referendum there. What are the plans with the Libertarians as part of the Joint Ticket Alliance to be able to open up the conversation and to further consolidate the third-party movement?
Yeah, look, firstly, we have to understand that the current voting system that we have is disadvantageous if you are running multiple minor parties, all with similar values. So at the moment, you can go through them. You've got Libertarians, you've got One Nation, you've got IMOP, you've got Gerard Rennick's party, you've got the Great Australia Party, you've got the list goes on. There was the Freedom Party down in Victoria, right? All very similar policies. Probably 90%, 80% of the policies are all very similar, and that's the nature of being a freedom-based, believer in freedom and individual rights, is that everyone wants to set up their own party. Is where on the other side of politics, it's very collectivist. So at the moment, you've basically got a divide in Australia. You've got Liberal Labor, and then you've got Greens to the left of Labor, and you've got all these as one single party, but you've got all these freedom parties to the right of the Liberal Party. Now, the way especially our Senate voting system works, it is very against it's disadvantageous to us to have all those minor parties, because the vote gets fragmented, it splits, and it doesn't preference back. So if you look at the numbers of how they vote, the Greens have currently got 12 senators. The Freedom parties should have currently 12 senators. And the reality is they've got 3, 2 with One Nation and 1 with Ralph Babbitt. Now, if we're able to unite that vote in the Senate and combine that vote in the Senate under one freedom ticket, within two elections, we'll have at least 12 senators in that parliament. That will go very close to giving us the balance of power, and we can really make some changes and really make a difference.
But Craig, Pauline Hanson would never sacrifice her own control of her party for the greater good of the Australian people. I know she talks a good game, but she's all about her own party. I mean, she's not part of this alliance, right?
No, she's not. Look, the reality is all the parties in the alliance are not only freedom-based parties, but they are freedom-based in the way they are structured. Right? We're not dictatorial. It's about the members having a say. It's from the grassroots up, and that's the way it has to be if this is going to be successful in the long term. Look, I don't like to criticise Pauline. She's done a great job. I have great admiration for her. She's done a great job over many years. But the reality is, I think she's mentioned she may retire at the next election. Right. And we've seen most of these, single identity parties, whether it's been Nick Xenophon or Don Chip over the years, as soon as they step away, the whole party facade, basically fades away because they don't have those democratic structures in there. That's likely to happen, I think, with One Nation in the years to come. And I hope that all these, with Clive Palmer, we've also got the newer election funding changes coming up. So it's going to be very difficult for him after the next election to toss tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in the election campaign.
Yeah.
So everything is pointing in the future for these parties to unite, especially in the Senate. And I say, if you want to, let them run as independent parties in the lower house, because the preference system in the lower house is different to the Senate preference system. So let them keep their identities as long as they want to, run their separate candidates in the lower house. But in the upper house, in the Senate, it's absolutely vital that if we're going to change things in this country, that everyone puts their egos aside and we all come together.
I just hope, and please reassure the listeners, because I think we can do this if we get behind you, if the people get behind you and support this movement, and I absolutely think they will, that when you reach a point of success, you won't forget that it's the people that helped get you guys there.
That's absolutely right, Nicola, absolutely right. It's the people that ultimately have got to have the decisions in all these things. And that's why we hope that, look, the door is still open to the other parties, to Clive and to Pauline, to come and join us at this election. If that doesn't happen, we'll extend that olive branch after the election campaign when the dust settles. And hopefully going forward, we can run as a united front, especially in the Senate, and really make a change. But up until then, we hope as many people at this next election can see and get behind what we basically got a triple alliance running in the Senate. There's many people who can support that. We can get a few senators elected, hopefully myself as well, and we can get in there and really, get stuck in and make a difference. Because the Senate is a place where you've got that Senate estimate process. Every law that gets passed has to pass through the Senate. The Senate is the place where you can really make a difference.
Well, there's been certainly a simplified process of making a decision for those people that have already made the decision to walk away from the two-party system. And when you look at the numbers, the primary vote for both the Labor Party and the Liberal Nationals is slumped and has for some time, but it seems to be getting less and less, so people are looking away. So the real question out there amongst the third-party movement is where you see the future lie. And you can probably see that there is a real shifting sands at the moment, that the Australia First Alliance is putting up its own base and is moving towards a solid future. Those will have to say, has One Nation reached its own used by date, or is that coming up? And will the Clive Palmer strategy of running a part-time political party, but being able to have the affordability to splash money around to be recognised, and will that itself gain traction? So there are three real ways to do it. Craig, last question. In the Senate, when people are voting for the Australia First Alliance and they put one above the line, how will preferences be distributed at that point? Has that been planned or discussed yet?
Those discussions will come up very shortly. But the most important thing I'd say about the preferences, remember, the parties only make recommendations. I think it's one of the most misunderstood things of Australian election campaigns. So many people I see commenting online think either the parties do some secret backroom deal and the preferences are all given away, right? The parties only make a recommendation. The only person that gives a preference is the person that marks the ballot paper with a pen in hand. Right?
Except, of course, if you put one above the line, and that's all you have to do in the Senate, then doesn't that flow to what's already been planned?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay.
If you only put one above the line and your party gets knocked out, your vote basically gets tossed away. So the more squares that you number on that Senate ballot paper, the more powerful your vote becomes.
I like what you said there, Craig. Use a pen.
Use a pen. Go in there, mark it with a pen, right? And if you mark like just one, you can mark one in the Senate, right, and your vote will be counted, right? However, if the party that you chose gets knocked out in the first rounds or gets knocked out, right, your vote basically gets put aside and it expires and gets put in the bin. So if you write 2, your vote stays alive. If you wrote 3, your vote stays alive. 4, 5, 6. So I'd encourage people to number as many squares as you possibly can. They recommend, I think the AEC rules are that parties must recommend at least 6. But I'd say actually vote for more than 6. Now that's what happened. Just if there's quick time, that's how Fatima Payman got elected in Western Australia at the last election. When the last vote came down, it was around about 150,000 for Labor, 130 for One Nation, and 100,000 for Liberals. And the silly Liberals in Western Australia didn't preference One Nation amongst their top 6. So all of those votes that normally would have flown to One Nation in preferences expired and Western Australia elected 3 from the Labor Party, 1 from the Greens, and only 2 from the Liberal Party. And that's how Fatima Painen got elected into the Parliament, was because the silly Liberals over there didn't do a full preference allocation across the ticket, and we had hundreds of thousands of votes expire over there.
Gosh, that's
Right.
terrible.
So to be clear, on the very long Senate ballot paper that you'll get in whatever state that you're in, if you are going to vote for Australia First Alliance, you put that number 1, and on the top of the line, you then rank 2 and onwards to your choice of preference. Is that what you're saying?
No. This would be finalised, but I'd hope that we would rank. We'd be putting One Nation, Clive's party, some of the other minor parties that may be running on the ticket. We'd be putting them well ahead of any of the major parties.
Yep. So that totally makes sense. So the same way you would operate in terms of the lower house, that you have to rank them from 1 down to 7 or 8 or whatever
Correct.
it is in each thing. You do the same across the top line in the Senate, not just marker number 1.
Yes. Look, if we're not successful, I'd be very happy to see a One Nation candidate get elected into the Senate.
I wouldn't.
Whoever, Clive's obviously going to put up someone. I don't know who they are, but I'd imagine that they would have similar ideals to I would, and I'd be very glad to see them get in the Senate. So I don't want to see our votes expire if someone votes only once. I'd encourage people to vote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and more on, and so on, if you like, in the parties of your preference.
Yep. Well, there you go. Craig, look, as usual, we can always have the most robust and open and honest discussions. There is no subject that is off limits when Craig Kelly is around, and that's what people want, this transparency, this radical transparency, and the idea to be able to have conversations, because this is the point. The politicians are elected of the people, for and by, to serve the people, and the people's voices must be heard. There are no silly ideas. There are only ideas. And that there is the point. Thanks so much for being on the show. I hope to get you back on again as we get closer to the election, because you're able to make sense for a lot of people, and it's been a thrill to be part of it. And I have to say, as I said to the gentleman yesterday, Craig, you're the reason I joined the United Australia Party. Gerard Rennick was the reason I left the United Australia Party, and Michael O'Neill was the reason why I still stay in it. I think Michael is the kindest, most genuine person I've ever met in Australian politics. He has time for absolutely everybody. He is absolutely selfless. He will put anyone first where he realises that there is something to be gained for all Australians, and that's the purpose of this Australia First Alliance. For the first time, we have a healthy new way, a breath of fresh air, and it's no wonder why there's been such a brilliant positive reaction to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Jason. Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks, Nicola. Greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, how about that, Craig Kelly? Amazing that we're getting so far ahead now in moving to something brand new that you can actually go, we are going to make a difference once
we
and
have
for
a
all.
shot. We have a shot. We have a shot in hell of making a difference. And you know what's going to happen if we don't listen to this idea and get behind this idea as a possibility, as our last best hope? What we're going to have is more of what I'd like the listeners to listen to in this clip now from the likes of the Labour Party, the Liberals, but this one is Anthony Albanese.
$0.2 billion announcement today, $5 million, $10 million, $200 million, $3 billion, $350 million, $2 billion, $37 million, $842 million, $2.4 billion, $8.5 billion, $4.8 billion.
Well, there you go, Nicola. I reckon it's time for our own Doge. This guy's unbelievable.
It's a lot of money. And you know what? That's the money of the people. This is Australians' money that this guy is spending like a drunk lottery winner on his building projects, on these so-called 40-story affordable homes at the beach. There are no 40-story apartment buildings with affordable homes. I mean, and they say it's Melbourne's Gold Coast at Frankston. Well, show me an affordable house that's an apartment on the beach at the Gold Coast. I mean, it's just ridiculous. These people are insane. It's got to stop. And, I do think that these guys, these three in particular, Craig Kelly, Senator Gerard Rennick, and Michael O'Neill, understand Australia and what Australia was and what Australia could be again. And I think People are wrung out, Jason. I don't think it's a tipping point. They can't take much more of what's going on because the lies and the hypocrisy are so obvious. And I'm assuming you think this could work.
Of course, this is the very, very beginning of a brand new direction, and like I do, like you can obviously tell that I'm a big picture thinker, and I can't, the one thing that bothers me, that's why I threw it at Craig, is that the cop out answer that we like the monarchy because that's it, but at the same time, King Charles is attending World Economic Forums, and then you look at Gavin Ashenden saying that the House of Windsor is going to collapse in William's lifetime. That's the chaplain to Queen Elizabeth. If we're not talking about it, it's gonna come up in our face. Charles will be gone almost as quickly as the Pope will be gone. William may or may not be king. William's a flippant globalist as well, attending WEF meeting. What the hell are we doing? We can't stand under the flag, the Australian flag with the Southern Cross on the Union Jack, and the guy that's meant to be the ruler of the Union Jack is a globalist. He doesn't even support his own Union Jack, for goodness sake. We have to have the conversation. And that's why I threw out the idea of the 51st state. Of course, it's never going to happen. But the idea is we've got to think outside the square in all of this and realise, who do we want to be as Australia? Why is Australian, as you allude to, our standard of living is down the gurgler. We are going backwards. We are following Europe's plan, whereby we're going to import people that don't actually want to necessarily embrace what Australia is, was, and whatever. Bring your own culture, great, fantastic, but it doesn't mean you don't play by the rules of what being Australia is. The beautiful part of what was the lucky country, the greatest part of the world. You don't leave a shit country to come to a good country and turn the good country into where you came from. Makes
Oh,
no
I know.
sense.
Oh, there's so much of that going on. And look, I'm not poo-pooing your idea entirely because I do think there are a lot more rights and therefore a better standard of living and opportunity in America than there are here. I wouldn't have said that 5 or 6 years ago, though. The interesting thing about, say, someone like me, and as you say, these other Australians, these new Australians that do come here, is that I chose to be here. So that's slightly different than being born here. It's a bit like being an adopted child. There's something a little bit special about it, because you were chosen, and I chose Australia. And because I was a success in my career at the time, I was able to live and work all over the world. And I was reaching an age where I was planning on having children, and I thought, where is the best country of all the countries I've lived in? Strange and random countries, Turkey and Bahrain and Morocco and America and all over, France, Germany, Spain. Where would you like to raise your children? And I chose Australia. Well, in essence, Australia chose me. I felt like an almost magnetic pull back to this place. But there's, you don't come here, you don't choose Australia and then come here and want to literally radically change it. We've literally got new Australians in Parliament, and as MPs saying, this place is terrible. This place is racist. This place is homophobic and transphobic. And this place is destroying the planet and causing climate change. Well, why are you here then? If you don't love Australia, I would have thought a prerequisite for being a new Australian was loving Australia. And look, I'm not saying it's all new Australians. Through the line of work I'm in at the moment, I meet lots of new Australians who seem genuinely grateful to be here, happy to be here. They tell me they've got more opportunities in this country than they've ever had from the countries they've arrived from. And those are the real people. But there are lots of new Australians who don't seem to like us very much. So it begs the question, why are you here? Even if you're a born here Australian, if you don't like us very much, then piss off. There's plenty of other countries you could go and live in as an Australian if you don't like Australia, right? But they don't, right? Because instead they just want to sit here and moan about it. So do something about it. Instead of supporting major political parties, because that's what's behind the desecration of Australia. I mean, it would have been a political party at some level that has decided that we give away all our natural gas and then we don't tax the greedy corporates who make profit off it. That's unfortunately not a corporate decision. It's probably comes from corporate lobbyists who then lobby our politicians to allow that to happen. But why? Because the people of this country who do love Australia Australia would be a lot more financially better off and therefore have a lot more peace of mind during this period in history if they were benefiting somewhat from the minerals and the energy that was being ripped from the soil in their name. And it really does feel like a heist. And so, the good thing I think about new Australians is lots of them who arrive here, they seem to have chosen lots of people who are bringing wealth, and they are bringing an absolute, they're resolute that they will work. So that most of them do seem to be coming here and working, which actually is in direct contrast to the UK. A lot of new Britons who arrive, they sort of go on the dole immediately. They're on social security, so they're financially breaking the country. So somehow slightly better decisions have been made in Australia. But as that clip showed, we can't keep blowing through money for projects. When are the Australian people going to be considered a project? Because surely with an economy, if you create wealth in the individual, what does that individual do? If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd be out, spend. I'd be buying properties, I'd be buying cars, I'd be putting back into the country. And these politicians are not doing that. They're taking away individual wealth and preferencing the wealth of the corporations. And that's why they're giving the corporations all these resources for free. And it has to be rejigged. And I hope that the Australia First Alliance is going to help do that.
It's really simple, isn't it? When you think about an economy, it's the pie, it's the family pie on the dinner table, and the process is that the current government, the Labor Party, their business is the redistribution of said pie, how that pie is cut up, and it seems that they like to take the first cuts for themselves, and what's left over they distribute amongst, and then what they do is they distribute it to those they believe will give them the most power, and of course, immigration's a great way to do it.
But corporations don't vote.
No.
A lot of power is with the corporations, Jason. So,
well, of course, but the reason where the corporations get their power is because the corporations are able to fund the election campaigns. That's it's a simple
and the AI. Yeah.
Well, part of it, but that's what my mate Peter Richards would say is the self-licking ice cream. So what's Trump trying to do? He's making you a bigger pie. That's the whole point.
Right.
And those that don't get their slice for free, but they're invited to take part in a much bigger pie, and there lies the point. There's so much going on over in the US.
I love the word pie, by the way. Can I just say, especially the way you say it, there's something about it. It just keeps saying pie.
There you go. I'll try and say it one more time before we end the show. But look, in the US, you've got the governor of Chicago, Pritzker, coming out there and saying Donald Trump is lying when he says that the tariffs are good for the economy, and all it is that it's going to cost you more. But what he doesn't say, and this is what these politicians are so good at, is that the purpose of introducing tariffs is for the ability to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service. He's going to get rid of income tax because, as it turns out, income tax may have been illegal in the first place.
Yes, it was a wartime effort. Income tax for all of us was for countries to recover from the war, and these greedy bastards have hung on to it for 100 years now.
So many people are looking for what will be this Jassara trigger moment. And if it turns out that it could be COVID reparations for what was done to everyone on planet Earth, or what if in the United States it was because the income tax proves to be illegal and then they've got to pay that back to all of the people that have paid income tax for their entire lives and their families, that might be the way. But then what he's saying is that we're going to introduce an external revenue service and tariff. Now, what it does, it only works when you have ingenuity and you have incentive, and of course that's why it's going to work for the United States more than anyone else. But of course, any big, massive, radical change around the world means that people are going to get offside. So this is the only moment in history where it is perfectly sensible to come up with big, radical ideas, like Australia becoming the 51st state, like looking off planet, like pointing AI at the universe and saying, go work that out and leave us alone. All these, there's nothing now off the table. And as it turns out now, Anna Paulina Luna has come out and said that she's now announced the website that you'll be able to go to access the JFK files and when they're going to be revealed. And that means that the citizen journalists in that space will be able to devour that information and determine what's going on. So in the age of radical transparency, nothing is off limit. This is why it is so exciting as we look. And I think that, the peril is that they may try to take us out, but at the same time, information is key. This is the age of Aquarius, the horizontal dissemination of information. Nothing is off limit, and our best days, I maintain, are certainly ahead of us.
I hope so, Jason. And I hope we can chronicle them on this show because I really do love our listeners and they talk a lot of sense and they send me so much information. And by the way, if you're someone that is amused or interested in the whole concept of man landing on the moon, and I used to sort of wear that with a badge of honor because I was born in 1969. And I used to say as a kid, I was born in the year they landed on the moon. Yeah, I don't actually believe that anymore. But there's a funny clip by a guy, a cowboy in America, that's sitting on my X account. My X account is at All Bite No Bark 88. Jason's is Jason Q Citizen 1, and it's this guy talking about, what kind of stupid are you if you think that they got to the moon, played a little hopscotch, and then without any infrastructure whatsoever, in other words, without that launch pad, made it back down to Earth. And when you think about some of the things we've been told and what they're doing in America, and what Pam Bondi is doing, whether we get the Epstein list or not, probably not. That was probably flushed down the toilet a long time ago. But JFK, possibly the moon, 9/11, all of it. It just goes to show that we have been lied to for a very, very long time. I don't think America's ever going to admit that the moon landing was fake. But, it's just such an eye-opening time in history, Jason. And I think it's going to reach a point where we're going to have to laugh about it, but it's frightening, right? It's frightening that it's been all of my lifetime. I'm 55, that a lot of things I held dear and held on to, like being born in the year man landed on the moon, is probably false. And I would like to live in a world of transparency. What would you like to say before we go, Jason?
Well, two big things to add to what you've said. Ian Carroll, an independent content creator, if you will, a big rabbit hole guy, he was on Joe Rogan recently, and he was talking all about Pizzagate. Which is massive.
That's a big one. Yeah.
That's huge. So that's putting that back front and center ahead of what may well be a release of Epstein files one way or another. And we're told that the Department of Justice, the FBI, has been delivered thousands, if not tens of thousands of pages of evidence in that case. And the other big news related to all of this is that Richard Gage, the architect who's been very, very outspoken in the space of 9/11, who I was lucky enough to interview on TNT, and it was the only interview where we handed over editorial control, if you will, of the interview. What I mean is that Richard took over my screen and he was able to put up all of his slides as he went in what was a radio interview that we obviously were video recording. And it's totally unique. I've still got that. That'll be well worth sharing. But Richard Gage has announced that he will be part of this 9/11 uncovering of information. And what he knows is absolutely extraordinary. So he can demonstrate with incredible amounts of evidence what really happened to the buildings, how they fell, et cetera, et cetera. So now all of the work from all of the people that were marginalized and have been working in the background for years and years, and you go back to 2001, Richard Gage, this is a quarter of a century in the making. If that's not radical transparency, and if this is not the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes, then you're going to have to get another lifetime to wait for the next one, because there is nothing like that. When Richard Gage is out there, when Ian Carroll's talking about Pizzagate on Joe Rogan to tens of millions of people, the floodgates, the drip, it's about to go flood, everyone. We are in for a real treat. Have a great weekend. And next week, hopefully, there'll always be a little bit of up, down, forwards, backwards, but things are going to be on fire as we approach, Nicola, our 50th show at the end of next week.
I know, it's a big milestone. I'm going to look so old with all this truth and information coming out because, those moments are like quite stressful. But I have always said, I've said in my relationships, in my marriages, and in business, even if it's bad news, I'd rather know the truth. So I think that's probably going to happen. But thanks again for listening in. I hope you enjoyed all those comments from the members so far of the Australia First Alliance. I do think that's probably going to grow. Have a fantastic weekend. Please share the show as much as you can. I do feel there's a naughty bit of shadow banning going on with our show, particularly on X. So I would ask that absolute bitch AI to back off, all right? In the words of Sigourney Weaver, get away from her, you bitch. Do not play with my radio show. And congratulations to the other podcasters who we didn't mention, who are at least trying to help the situation politically in Australia. This has been The Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olborn. We will do this all over again on Monday.